Hey, hi. Thanks so much for joining this session. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joined us from different parts of the world. Thanks so much for joining another LeadSquared webinar. I'm your host, Shivani Roy. You probably hear me every now and then if you join a webinar or receive an email from me. So today we'll be talking about KPIs and digital transformation. So we'll be discussing effective KPIs to measure your digital transformation journey. So some of the things that we'll cover today are what matters most during digital transformation, front-end transformation measures for that, measures for back-end transformation, and of course, putting an effective measurement program in place. Now, to take us through that session is Malay Shah. He is the Chief Growth Officer at LeadSquared. Prior to LeadSquared, he spent about 2 decades in management consulting profession, working with firms like EY, McKinsey, Infosys, and so on. And he's got a strong experience in advising clients in areas such as go-to-market strategy, digital transformation, and so on. Thanks so much, Malay, for joining us today. If you could please share a few lines about yourself and take the session forward.
Thanks, Shivani. Appreciate the warm welcome and good afternoon, again, good morning, good evening to wherever you are joining from. Appreciate you taking time to spend next 45 minutes to an hour with LeadSquared. As Shivani just mentioned, I've come on board LeadSquared about a month back in the role of Chief Growth Officer. For all of you who might not be aware about LeadSquared, we are largely a B2C CRM and sales and marketing automation platform company. We operate in a SaaS model, and we enable the entire omni-channel customer journey. Across multiple channels, whether it is web, SMS, chat, landing pages, field sales, chatbots, just to name a few. And in terms of understanding the customer journey across these channels, and then enabling our clients in terms of managing their sales and marketing processes in the most effective manner. So without further ado, let me quickly jump into the agenda for the day, and I'll just on slide number 1. So we will have a fairly crisp discussion today, and basically we will talk about from our vantage point of view, how do we view digital transformation, and then what are the important measures, for example, that we are seeing clients embarking on in terms of driving their digital transformation journey. Now, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, and we would be happy to hear your experiences and the metrics and measures that you would also be managing in terms of looking at your digital journey. For the simplicity purpose, we have broken this down into 3 different areas: largely the customer experience side of things, the operations, and which covers everything from sales and marketing operations to order management operations to supply chain and even the back office HR finance operations as well. And then the last but not the least, is the business model innovation. So we'll cover our entire presentation in these 3 distinct areas. What we will do is, towards the later part of the presentation, we will leave another 15 minutes for Q&A. Feel free to, however, in the meantime, keep sending any of your questions that you might have to Shibani, and she will collate all those questions so that we have adequate time towards the end of the presentation to discuss those questions as well. So let me start with slide number 1, and I think it's a very interesting day. I mean, today specifically, if I were to really look at, I mean, we just heard about the Geo Fiber, which was launched yesterday, and we are talking about a massive 700 billion opportunity from a new commerce perspective, which will be enabled through Geo Fiber. As you all know, we are one of the largest digital data consuming nation in the world, with more than 243 million internet users who are already enabled, and we have a significant portion of those internet users who are mobile only users. And we are looking at a month-on-month a massive amount of growth in terms of digital consumers in a country like India, where we are adding more than 10 million, for example, users on Geo alone. And for example, even before the launch, I think Reliance got some 15 million registration on Geo Fiber. So I mean that talks about the power of consumer and power of consumption in the country. And I think the digital has become so pervasive within this entire ecosystem that it touches practically our entire life cycle. I mean, right from even before a child is born, I think the mother is typically engaged in a digital journey by hospitals like Cloud9, for example, to looking at where the learning, for example, begins at age 3 on tabs where kids are using Byju's application, and then as you move into the other part of the life cycle, young consumers who wants experiential life cycle, whether it is commuting on a daily basis, whether it is ordering the food, whether it is looking at their travel, all of this again being managed on digital channels. And I think it's so pervasive that we don't even realize how easily and how seamlessly we are intertwined in the digital world. And then if you really look at the other part of the mature Gen X kind of consumer life cycle, whether they are looking at making decisions on their financial side, purchasing insurance policies or filing their taxes, or looking at their wealth and making investments, either in terms of the real estate, or whether they want to make investment in terms of purchasing cars, which are all, again, by the way, heavily digitally connected, to even looking at the later part of the consumer life cycle, where again health becomes a priority, and again health being delivered through digital channels, right? So I think, and if you see the old, and these are just a sample names of some of the companies that we have put up over here, who are, you can say some of them are born and they are digital native companies, so to speak, and some of them have really transformed the way a consumer experience has been delivered. So I think at the center of all of this, right, so the way we really look at the center, or at the core of all of this, there are three important elements which are really important from a digital transformation standpoint. The first and the foremost is compelling customer experiences. Some of them would even go on to say that this should be scintillating experiences as well for the consumer, and who is connecting with the enterprises across multiple channels, whether it is web, whether it is mobile, whether it is social, whether it is emails, whether it is chatbots, so on and so forth. And I think those experiences are, some of these companies are able to provide those experiences in a very compelling way. I think the second key differentiation that you would typically see when we look at digital is the operations. And by operations, what we really mean is operations which are enabled through digital, and operations which are massively scalable. So for example, when you talk about some of these companies, they utilize chatbots, they utilize robotics process automation, which are working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and at times, creating a very disruptive kind of cost structure, which is very hard to beat by, if companies have not invested in digital assets, so to speak. And the third piece that we are talking about over here is the entire business model innovation. So some of these companies, by leveraging power of digital, whether it's on the experience side or whether it's on the operation side, are able to create products and services which are absolutely unmatched, right? And there are some of these are absolutely new products, new services, new partnerships, new commercial structures. Some of the structures which also is moving into more into transaction based models, or which is moving into more into services based model as well. So just one simple example I will give in this space is let's say if we were to take an example of Oyo Rooms, it will have the same inventory as Hilton Hotels by 2023. And by the way, Hilton Hotels took 93 years to get there, and Oyo Rooms would have built this out in a span of less than 6 to 7 odd years, right? And this is also reflecting in some of the unicorns, and we are all aware of some of the larger unicorns like Flipkart and the Olas of the world, but we are now creating another generation of unicorns as well, whether you look at Byju's, whether you look at Swiggy, whether you look at Zomato. And even today, for example, Meesho, for example, which is one of the social commerce firm, got funded by $125 million by NASSCOM. So I think this is what is happening in the digital world. And I think to succeed in this digital world, the CX, ops, and business model innovation is absolutely critical. From our vantage point, where we sit right now, we like to call ourselves as more of a a player which is providing a lot of shovels and picks for companies which are digging into this consumption gold mine, and which is leveraging digital to dig into this consumption gold mine. And we enable a lot of those journeys for the customer. So I think for the rest of the presentation, we'll quickly talk about each of these three areas in context of what you ought to measure in CX, what you ought to measure in ops, what you ought to measure in BMI, and how LeadSquared is helping some of these companies drive this measurement program in a much focused and in a much better way. So let me move to slide number 3, and here is one illustrative example of a customer journey. I mean, this is one example that we have just drawn out for a retail enterprise, but this example could have been very similar for, let's say, a company selling insurance, or for a company selling hospitality products, or company selling healthcare products, or company selling education products, or any other financial services. And what you realize is this entire journey of a customer, right, who is first of all becoming aware of a product, of a brand, through channels which are not just offline channels, but through digital channels, through web, through social media, through email campaigns, through SMS campaigns, to the customer who is then getting interested and either trying to be a do-it-yourself kind of customer who will want to make a purchase online. So that online purchase could be made on, let's say, on a website, or it could be made on a marketplace, or it could be made by visiting a physical store, or it could be made by requesting an appointment to be done at a hospital, or asking for a field sales rep to make a visit to you at their own doorstep. So there could be any of those journeys, and where potentially, let's say, the conversion happens, and then the entire fulfillment piece, where a product is fulfilled or a service is fulfilled, and you are onboarding that customer within your own client organization. And in some cases, you may have to do a KYC kind of process to onboard a particular customer, and then you are retaining that customer over a period of time. You are trying to upsell into that particular customer. You are trying to meet his or her any service or support needs, and finally you are ensuring that there is a loyalty, and then the customer stays not only with you as a loyal customer, as a loyal profitable customer, but who also becomes a promoter of your brand on potential multiple other social media channels. So I think there are three distinct characteristics that we see in this entire consumer journey, or rather four. So the first is in most of these B2C scenarios, we see this customer journey as absolutely omni-channel. So the customer could get interested or excited about a product or a service, again, in any of the channel, as I mentioned. It could be on website, or it could be on social media, or it could also be on a call center. But the entire life cycle also follows very similar omni-channel journey as well, which means the opportunity could get closed again, could generate on a call center but get closed on a website, could generate on a website but get closed in a field sales visit, for example. So most of the journeys are omni-channel. It's very important for someone to understand how customer is interacting with your organization across all the multiple different channels. I think the second big piece about this B2C journeys is the fact that it is high volume. I mean, we absolutely talked about the fact that someone like Reliance is adding 10 million geo users every month. So people are not talking about year-on-year kind of growth. People are talking about month-on-month growth, and people are talking about some of these numbers which is in high lakhs and millions rather than in few hundreds, right? The third part is this is high velocity environment. So basically what you are looking at in this B2C journey is the fact that the deal closure can be like a radioactive material which would disappear if you are not able to engage the customer and close the deal within a short period of time. A simple example, like for example, if a customer is looking at travel insurance as a product to buy, and if you don't close the deal in, let's say, 24 hours, the chances are that the customer would have potentially even flown abroad, or would have traveled to any other location, and that deal or that opportunity is no longer with you. So it's really high velocity environment, and you need to really understand what customer is doing across those channels. And last, you have to get a one integrated view of what a customer is doing across all these channels, because otherwise you will only get half the picture, and you will not be able to organize your own sales, marketing, order management, your supply chain processes to be able to align with the customer who is interacting with you across all these multiple channels. The reason why we brought this up was because I think when we move into the next slide, which is when we are talking about what are the key CX matrix that you ought to be tracking, I think it's very important for us to look at this as a frame of reference, and then really understand what we should be really measuring to be able to really have a high impactful CX organization or a customer services organization. So let me talk about the customer experience matrix first, right? So the first and the foremost piece here is that are obviously, most of the consuming company or most of the B2C organization are operating in a highly competitive environment. Chances are there would be similar other players, and that's where the first and the foremost thing is the traffic. How are you building your digital traffic becomes very, very important, and which means that even before, let's say, a customer has walked into a dealership or has walked into a retail store or has walked into a clinic doorstep or has walked into a hospital doorstep, your reputation would have traveled much further ahead of that customer making that particular visit, because most of the customers are informed customers who are making decisions on the digital channels first, and as a result of which, building that digital traffic is one of the most important parameters that one has to measure. And some of the leading indicators for that are obviously things like are you doing what is your Moz rank. Moz rank typically measures how popular are your web pages and how effectively are they linking or backlinking to other web pages, and what is the quality of content that you have on those web pages. And that will be one of the KPI from a search engine optimization perspective that will help you drive traffic to your digital channels. The second piece is just like you would measure the footfalls and the walk-ins in a in-store environment, or let's say in a brick and mortar environment, you have to also measure what kind of impressions you are making, what kind of visits you are what kind of website visits you are getting, what kind of downloads you are getting for your materials which are on the digital channels, what kind of followership you are building in the social channels as well. And these are all some of the leading predictive indicators. By on their own they might not mean much, but I think it gives you a clear picture in terms of how your rest of your funnel will really look like, and this is something that you ought to fix first. Um, the, the and the and the third piece is what kind of interest you are able to generate. So what's the kind of lead volume that you are able to generate, and which are your most effective channels for those leads? Are your digital campaigns giving you a better ROI than let's say your newsprint ads, or let's say when compared to your potentially, let's say, TV commercial? Because this will give you a perspective in terms of where you should be investing in what particular channels. And I think the last but not the least, but the most important point in measuring each of this matrix is really looking at whether you are able to move the needle on a month-on-month basis, in some cases even week-on-week basis. And I think that's and so no longer people are talking about just the year-on-year growth, but you are able to see are you able to build a 100,000 followers, and how you are able to move from 100,000 followers to 1 million followers, how you are able to improve your ranking and the lead volume and lead by channel. So I think this is the number one matrix that you ought to start measuring and start looking at when you are embarking on your digital transformation journey. I think the second piece, once you have built the traffic, is really what is the quality of traffic and what is the quality of engagement that you are able to get from those consumers again on your digital assets. So, for example, if you were to really look at a lot of mobile apps, have a very high first-time download rate, but if you really look at the retention and the customer spending time on a mobile app or on a website at times tends to be very, very low. And then people at times delete those apps also within a shorter period of time. So I think it's very important to look at, let's say, if someone has downloaded a Byju's application, are the parents or are the children who are going to be the key users of those applications, how engaged are they on the content on those apps and on those websites. So how much time they are spending, are they opening the emails? I mean, and if your open rates, for example, are not in high double digits and potentially even higher, then you will actually do more damage by leveraging the digital channel rather than leveraging them effectively. How many people are signing up for your products, for your offers, for your potentially for your newsletters, etc. What kind of the shares and the likes that you are getting. You may have a very large volume of subscribers, but if people are not promoting again and are not liking the content that they have, again, that gives a indicator of how engaged your followers are on your digital assets. So this is the engagement becomes a very important criteria in terms of looking at the quality of engagement that you are able to measure and build across multiple channels. The third piece, obviously, which is where the rubber hits the road, is conversion, because at the end of the day, for any organization, all of this has to ultimately convert into revenues, and for that, obviously, to get to the revenue, you have to look at what are your click-through rates or what are your conversion rates at various points in the funnel. You have to really evaluate where people are dropping off the funnel, and you will be surprised that a lot of the highest drop off rates happens at the point of purchase, right? So you will have a lot of abandoned shopping carts, for example, and I think that becomes an important metric for you to really look at how many of the customers that you have been able to bring into your digital assets, how many of those effective engagement that you have been able to convert into a paying customer for you. So the subscription signups, for example, the revenue that you're getting from the digital channel, I think if ultimately you don't keep an eye on this, then digital just becomes like me too exercise without really giving you the value. And the last important point on the conversion side is also the digital has to not only give you an additional revenue stream, but it has to also give you economics which is differentiated, right? And that's why your cost per lead or cost per acquisition or cost per click has to be significantly lower than your traditional channels, and you should be able to realize much higher return on marketing investment. So moving on, I think the next point is once you have converted, the retention obviously becomes the next important point. And I think this is where the digital companies are really winning in the market. Is again, as I mentioned earlier, where people are transforming their business model as well. So one is obviously how do you reduce your churn. The customers, Geo might claim that they've got 10 million subscribers a month, but how many of them are they able to really retain? Um, so I think the retention becomes and the churn becomes an important parameter. And the churn we will also look at can be measured in multiple different ways. You can measure a logo churn, which is are your customers, are they generally churning, and the revenue churn as well. And in some companies you will find a negative revenue churn, which means that a customer who is moving out is actually or rather existing customer at the time of renewal is more profitable than the customer who is moving out, in which case a lot of the companies might have a negative revenue churn as well. And I think another important point over here is are you able to convert your customers and convert your business model into a subscription business model? So what is your kind of monthly revenue recurring rate? What's your annual recurring rate of revenue from those customers? And again, we have seen this across the board. We have seen where people are thinking about, for example, car as a service, right? Where you will basically purchase a car on a subscription model, and the entire economy is obviously moving into that direction, where it either becomes a subscription or it becomes a transaction-based pricing model. And finally, are those happy customers? What is your difference between highly satisfied customers and difference of highly dissatisfied customers, which is your NSAT or your net promoter score? And will they promote your product? And will they provide you with a word of mouth kicker in terms of spreading your product and spreading good news about your product and good things about your brand as well? So retention becomes another important parameter. And the last piece is promoters, and your happy customers, for example, are they buying more of your services? So are you able to do a better cross sell and upsell with them? Is the lifetime value of that customer, is that really increasing or not? And what is the average revenue that you are getting per customer or per account? So ARPA or ARPU becomes a very important parameter over here. So these are as anyone embarking on a digital transformation journey, if you're not measuring and managing this matrix, right? I think that becomes only half the story, because the digital is all about, the power of the CX and power of the business model innovation. And this gives you, one way to look at, whether your business is moving in the right direction or not. I'll quickly move on to the other set of metrics, which basically are focused more on the operation side. So as I mentioned, digital is not only about engaging B2C consumers in a digital environment, but it's also about managing your operations at a very different, in a very differentiated economics, and which gives you, additional disruptive power in the market as well. So on the operation side, one of the first parameter that we look at is for example, sales. Are you able to drive more sales or more revenue with maybe, fewer set of sales reps, right? Or is your revenue per sales FTE, is it going down? And I think this is a good indicator in terms of, and this could be any industry, right? Which means that, are there people who are signing up on the digital channels? Then obviously your revenue per sales FTE will go up significantly. If you have a larger inside sales team, this will go up significantly. If you have a partner channel which is again engaging on a digital commerce channel, then you will potentially see a much larger revenue per sales FT. So I think that is one of the key metrics that one should look at. The cost per visit. I mean, in some industries, obviously, the field sales rep is never going to go away, and then hence, but what you are really looking at, basically making him or her extremely productive. So what is your cost per visit? What is your cost per call? What is your cost per demo? What is your cost per service? I think that becomes an important parameter that, again, from a digital perspective, whether you are able to move the needle on this or not. The third one is CAC, which is your customer acquisition cost. Are you spending basically, less money to acquire a new incremental customer? And I think that CAC becomes an important parameter, and most digitally savvy and sound companies will be able to reduce CAC over a period of time, and then improve their LTV per CAC. LTV is your lifetime value of a customer divided by, customer acquisition cost. So the thumb rule in Bay Area is, for example, anything greater than 3 is good, and if something is greater than 5, then it's great. So again, one should look at their LTV to CAC ratio. Another ratio that one could also look at is a ratio called Bessemer ratio, and this applies a little more in the B2B kind of scenarios where you are potentially, signing, or also in subscription models where you are signing up, a customer on an annual contract value. And so what is your, current new signed annual contract value, and that divided by your, previous quarters customer acquisition cost gives you your Bessemer ratio. So that's another way to, again, look at whether you are, again, having the disruptive economics, especially in the digital world. Average time spent on a lead activity. Your sales support, per sales FTE. So do you have a lot of sales development, a lot of pre-sales, and can some of those pieces be automated? And that will give you, again, a lower sales support to a sales FTE number. And the AR aging. Ultimately, in sales, again, the collections from a customer standpoint becomes an important matrix. And how are you able to automate the entire AR process? Again, through, regular follow-ups, and again, all of those follow-ups can again be automated, in the digital environment as well. So again, these are some of the key metrics that one could look at from a sales perspective. If you were to look at from a core operations perspective, then there are other additional metrics, like how long does it take for you to onboard a customer, as an example? How complex is your order management cycle? And how long is your order management cycle? What is your support cost as percentage of revenue, or what is your support cost per ticket, for example, becomes an important parameter over here. And what is your overall cost per order? So your cost to manage an order has to go down significantly, right? So like, for example, if a customer who has downloaded a Swiggy app, the cost per order, it will be all in the digital world, rather than anyone, taking those orders in a call center or or even in an in-person environment. So your cost per order has to go down significantly in a digital area. Supply chain, again, your what is your cost to fulfill an order? How many lines of your order is auto planned? And ultimately, what is the kind of days of inventory that you are having, right? So again, these are additional parameters in supply chain. Finance from a back office perspective, again, are you able to reduce your general and administrative cost as percentage of revenue? Are you, again, putting in robotics process automation to do simple processes like, let's say, bank reconciliation, or to do your faster closure of your books of accounts? So is your days, are you having, your days of closing your books on a monthly or a quarterly basis, is it going down? What is your partner satisfaction in terms of the vendor satisfaction in particular, in terms of, are you able to pay their invoices on time or not? And finally, what is the kind of error rate that you are having in terms of doing your journal entries? So again, some of the parameters that we look at from a finance perspective. And last but not the least is, again, HR. So again, are you able to leverage digital to onboard an employee quickly? Is your revenue per FTE, and how optimized that is? And I think I'll give you one simple story over here. In fact, there's a story where, one of the taxi companies which got acquired by, another marketplace company. In fact, the company that I'm talking about over here was Taxi for Sure. So Taxi for Sure, when they were out in the market to get acquired by companies like Uber and Ola, Uber asked them a very simple question, saying, how many employees you have? And Taxi for Sure at that point in time had some 1,800 odd employees across their call center and across their entire booking team and across the technology team. And Uber was operating in 140 odd countries, and the answer that Uber had at that point in time was that they only had 800 employees, and Taxi for Sure was just operating in one country, and it was maybe 1/50th of their size. And that is what digital can really do in terms of, if you are able to really optimize, then you will have a very disruptive revenue per FTE numbers that one should look at. The third point is attrition. Is, are you able to, again, leverage digital to engage employees better and improve their engagements, their employee satisfaction scores, and reduce your attrition as well? So again, these are some of the metrics on the operation side I thought we can look at. I'm sure there will be many more other metrics, and again, this would vary from industry to industry and customer to customer. But it's, again, important to keep an eye on some of these metrics to see, is your digital transformation journey really giving you results or not? Finally, I'll take maybe last few minutes to talk about on the business model innovation side. And I think this becomes important because digital for the sake of digital obviously will have its step jump improvements on the revenue side and on the operation side. But I think the real critical measure here would be for, if you're able to leverage digital in terms of getting new revenue streams altogether. So what kind of revenue are you able to get from new products, new offerings, new services? Are you able to generate more revenues from newer channels? So you may have your traditional, single tier distribution or two-tier distribution, and now you may set up a direct online channel, or you may set up a marketplace channel. So what kind of revenue are you getting from that channel, both in absolute and percentage terms, becomes important. And the third point is, again, revenue from new partnerships. So digital is also about bringing in the entire ecosystem, in together. And are you able to create newer revenues from those partnerships as well? So I think this, in my mind, is the single biggest important parameter from a business model innovation perspective. Some of the other metrics we have just highlighted over here are more in terms of getting ready for digital. So these are more, you can call them as a product or an engineering set of metrics, which talks about how quickly are you able to introduce new products in the market. What is your pace of innovation? Are you able to drive incremental innovation practically on a day-to-day basis, on a week-on-week basis, on a month-on-month basis? So your number of epic stories, number of epics, number of story points, number of user stories become an important indicator in that direction. And what is your R&D cost as percentage of revenues? Again, this becomes an important parameter to look at. And again, you will have to obviously compare some of these numbers relative to the benchmarks in the industry, but it will give you a perspective in terms of, are you innovating rapidly enough in the market or not? Design and engineering, again, do you have, what's your cost of quality? What's your mean time to repair or mean time between failure? So again, these are some of the additional parameters that becomes important. And lastly, most of this digital innovation that we are seeing is also happening on a platform. And most of these platforms today have to be cloud or mobile ready. So are these platforms really, what is your cloud readiness? What is your mobile readiness? What is the resilience of this platform? As all of us, who are operating in digital world, is also exposed to newer security threats. So are these platforms likely to fail in the production environment? Are there potential security vulnerabilities that you have not designed? And I think it's very important for someone who is operating in digital world to really measure and monitor, your resilience, your agility as well. And finally, what is the kind of technical debt, and which is again inversely correlated to platform elegance. So what is the kind of technical debt you are also carrying, again becomes an important parameter. So I think with this, I think we have obviously talked about some maybe 30, 35 odd matrix that one could look at, but we just wanted to bucket in these three categories and say that these are the important matrix that any organization which is moving in the in rapidly in digital journey, should really look at. Us as again LeadSquared, we enable a lot of this, whether you want to call them as reports, whether you want to call them as dashboards, whether you want to call them as workflows within our tool sets. And I think what I would like to do maybe for the another, we have about maybe 10 more minutes where we can quickly take you through some of the things that you can do really out of the box within the LeadSquared environment itself, and see if and we can help a lot of these organizations to provide those capabilities again out of the box. So I'll just quickly show some of the parameters to you. Like one of the important parameters, this is one summary dashboard that we prepared for one of the customer who is really looking at the revenue growth. So they're looking at revenue growth, as I mentioned, not only on year-on-year basis but also on a month-on-month basis. They're looking at on a monthly basis, what is the monthly recurring revenue that they're having. And obviously monthly recurring revenue may not be the same as accounting revenue, but they keep an eye on both those parameters. Churn, as I mentioned, are you having a customer churn, and what is the value of what is the amount of that churn? Because you can keep going and you can keep acquiring newer customers, but if your existing customers are churning, and which has been the case for, let's say, for example, a lot of companies like Airtel, Vodafones of the world, Ideas of the world as well. When Jio came into the market, that there was some amount of churn that they witnessed, then you are basically digging a hole for yourself as well. So I think it's another important matrix. In addition to growth, you need to look at the churn as well. And finally, for example, what are you doing from a profit management perspective and cash management perspective? The next slide is again a simple view of a monthly recurring revenue performance on a month-on-month basis, and you can then break this churn data into sub parameters as well. So for example, what has been the new business acquisition volume really looking like? How many of your existing customers are upgrading, or are they, or you are able to cross-sell into those customers? So what is the volume of revenue or the monthly recurring revenue coming through upgrades or expansion? Are some of your existing customers potentially also downsizing your services or your products? And so that's another piece that you can measure. And finally is the churn that we already talked about earlier. So you need to look at your monthly recurring revenue performance and the composition of MRR across some of these 4 to 5 different parameters as well. Again, this is another dashboard which comes out of LeadSquared system. The third dashboard I just wanted to show is, and maybe for users, existing users of LeadSquared, you may be very intimately familiar and aware of what happens, and how a customer journey is being tracked on LeadSquared. But this is one simple example that you might have a 20 million consumer in your lead management system. For every single consumer, LeadSquared is able to track all the activity that the customer is doing, or your sales rep is doing, or your call center rep is doing with that particular lead or with that customer across all the channels. And by all the channels, I mean, again, web, SMS, emails, social media campaigns, across chat, across conversational AI. So across all those channels, you are able to track what they are doing, and how engaged they are, how active they are, and basis these insights and basis these signals, you can then automate your sales and marketing process to take certain corrective actions. So you can, for example, only if your score on that particular customer reaches, let's say in this case, we are looking at 2108. So only if the customer score reaches about 2000, you can decide that now your call center rep will make that particular call, or your field sales representative will go and meet that particular customer. So you can drive very defined set of actions and also improve your call center productivity and field sales productivity. And at the same time, you will have a single integrated view of the customer journey across channels. What we have in next couple of slides, again, we have listed out all the out of the box reports, and there are 110 out of the box report which directly come out of LeadSquared. So you can, and these are cuts across multiple different dimensions. So you can look at a lead dimension. You can identify over a period of time how many leads are assigned to from one sales representative to another sales representative, and that user could also be a call center user as well. or you can look at a full lead dashboard. And I'll maybe jump a couple of slides to just show you what a illustrative dashboard looks like. So you can look at a dashboard which will give you an integrated view in terms of what's happening, in terms of volume, in terms of engagement, in terms of quality of those leads, in terms of lead coming through variety of channels. So these dashboards again are coming directly out of the box from LeadSquared system. So you can look at that part as well. um, the other piece is all the activities which are happening on that particular lead. So again, how your organization, now you may have a organization which might have 5 different business units, you might have 20 different products lines, you may have 3 different channels, but across all these channels, across all those business units, across all the product groups, how everyone is interacting with that customer, you will be able to get a single integrated view for a customer. um, I'll move to the next slide. For example, here we talk about some of the marketing, the reports as well. So which are your best performing campaigns, which campaigns are giving you the best returns. You can get a view in terms of which channels are your best converting channels. So you can do conversion analysis by lead source. You can also identify the visitor to customer conversion analysis. How long did it take? Who converted best from becoming a visitor to customer in what length of time frame, so on and so forth. So I think just in interest of time, I'll maybe there are a lot of details again which is there in the appendix. We will circulate obviously this presentation, and it will also get uploaded on our webinar page as well. So I will potentially let you spend more time on each of these reports and what it can do for you in terms of managing your digital transformation journey. But I just last 2 minutes I would like to spend on slide number 12, and which is what has been our experience when organization put in a digital transformation program, and when they start putting in different KPIs, what has been our experience and what are some of the best practices that we have observed. We have just put out some of the best practices over here. So what we find in a lot of organization that there is no plethora of KPIs that track, but the keyword in KPI is the first part, which is the key, right? So this KPIs have to be the key performance indicators, and it's very important that you identify that are these KPIs, are this the one that I should be really measuring and monitoring. Once you identify that, I think it's very important that you have a very crystal clear definition of those KPIs as well, because again, while there are standard definition of CAC and LTV, there are people who use to there are different nuances on calculating customer acquisition cost in a different manner. There are nuances of calculating lifetime value of a customer in different manner. So you ought to define those KPIs very clearly. What do they mean? Which are the source systems from which this data will come? Who will provide this data? From which systems will this report get generated, etc., etc. Right? So KPI definition is the second important part. The third important part is, do I have a baseline of these KPIs? There's no point in putting in a KPI program unless I know, where am I starting from and what am I really aspiring to move towards. So the first point of exercise would always be to identify, what is my baseline on some of these KPIs, and can I start collecting the data, at least initially, if required, maybe even manually, but really looking at those baseline of those KPIs. And I think the KPIs then have to be, obviously, the accountability has to be established. So is it the sales department who is going to take accountability of that KPI, or is this going to be a shared accountability between, let's say, sales and marketing and success? So I think the KPI accountability again has to be clearly defined, and then those accountability and the targets have to be told to those departments or to those owners as well. And what we find is, we find a big gap between people who are doing the reporting versus where the accountability and the targets are set. And I think one of the first steps that what organizations really do is really shrink the gap between the two, and ensure that you put in a program where you start defining the KPIs, you start baselining them, you start assigning accountability, and then you start putting the targets, and then you start tracking those KPIs. So on the right side, we have put some of those metrics. And last but not the least, I mean, if this is a massive manual exercise just to collect data and report out on a weekly basis, a lot of these programs tend to either fail, or potentially even a stutter. So I think if a lot of these KPIs, if they come directly out of the system, if for example, what my lead score has been, rather than someone having to manually enter that, or if you know how the customer is engaging across channels or how engaged those customers are across channels, then it becomes that much an easier and automatic task. And that's why, a lot of this KPI should come directly out of the system. And again, again, at the point of repeating, I'll again mention that a lot of these pieces we automate and we provide in our system as well. So with this, without going further details, and I think, as I mentioned, we have some illustrative dashboards at the back of this presentation, which will circulate that with you to you. And happy to take a few questions. I think we will have about 10 to 12 minutes. So I'll maybe stop here and open up for questions. And I believe Shivani is taking these questions on the GoToWebinar. So feel free to send in your questions to her, and we will. I'm seeing few questions which are already popping up, and we'll start taking some of these questions one by one. Over to you, Shivani.
Thanks so much, Malay. There are quite a few questions that have already come in. So, guys, I'm just going to take it as they've come in. So, don't think I'm not addressing yours. I'll take it up in whichever order it's come. I'll start with Rahul's question. So, he says, for a subscription business, which are the most important metrics to measure?
Thanks, Shivani. Thanks. So Rahul, I think we partly covered that question earlier in our presentation. But again, as I mentioned, when we are talking about organizations moving into subscription model, right? They want, they want. I mean, organizations are looking at getting a recurring revenue stream from those customers over a much longer period, right? Rather than just being a point in time transaction. And that's where you are seeing potentially, even some of the most transactional systems like cab riding and cab hailing and food delivery, even they are putting in some loyalty programs, putting in some subscription revenue models as well. So I think one of the most important metrics for subscription businesses is your recurring revenue. And how much longer are you really able to stretch that recurring revenue over the life cycle of the customer? Obviously, this recurring revenue is not going to be perpetual. I mean, every organization, every consumer also has its own life cycle, but it's very important for you to start measuring your it could be a monthly recurring revenue, could be quarterly recurring revenue, or could be even an annual recurring revenue. And that's what even some of the likes of Microsoft, organization like Microsoft have done with, let's say, Office 365, which is to really convert their perpetual license model into a subscription based model. So one is the revenue part. The second important part that we also talked about earlier was the churn. It's important that as you keep going on the journey of acquiring more end customers, you keep an eye on your customers who are not renewing, or who are potentially going to competitors, right? Or who are not maybe happy with your product or service, and to really understand the reasons behind the churn as well. So churn is a very, very important metric, because that could really put your economics off by a very big margin. Even though you might have a very attractive lower cost of acquisition, but if your churn rate is very high, you will run at, sooner or later you will run into issues. So I think it's very important to look at those as two important metrics. Obviously, for a subscription business, we then talked about few other metrics as well, like what is your LTV to CAC ratio, what is your Bessemer ratio, and you can become even more and more granular. But at a big picture level, I think it's very important that we start looking at at least the recurring revenue part and the churn as two indicators of how you are doing on your business.
Perfect. Prashant, here goes your question. How do we drive adoption of our CRM system with our sales managers?
So if I were to maybe clarify that question a little bit, I think what you are asking is, I'm assuming you are already having a CRM system in place, and by sales managers, I mean I would assume you are saying that this would be a manager who might be supervising or overlooking maybe a set of additional sales reps, right, or a sales representatives. And I think if I were to look at it from that particular lens, it's important to really look at why they are not adopting in the first place. I think if that's an issue or a concern, one observation that we as LeadSquared already always had was sales reps really don't like spending um, a lot of time doing administrative activities or doing a lot of back office activities. So for example, if they have to capture every single activity with they do with their customers, and if they have to then again go back to the CRM system and then enter it into the system again, they believe it's an overhead, and that at times leads to adoption issues. So the way to manage it is obviously, one is to have system which is easy to use, which is intuitive, which is faster to adopt, which automatically maybe captures a lot of data for themselves. So I think that's one important point from a sales user standpoint. When it comes to sales managers, obviously, sales managers, I would assume, would be looking at lots of reports, lots of dashboards. They in turn might be required to keep a track how they are doing well on their target achievement. They may have to even report out their performance to potentially their executive management as well. So I think if we are able to enable the reporting dashboards, again, much easily, and maybe a lot more quickly, so that they don't have to spend time preparing Excel spreadsheets and time preparing PowerPoint presentations. And I think if a lot of those metrics can go right from the system and can get reported out easily, again, that drives an additional amount of adoption. And I think when it comes for those sales managers, again, reviewing the performance of sales reps, again, if they are able to again do that, in the while they are using the CRM system itself, then obviously that's an additional additional benefit. So I would believe, I address some of your concerns potentially from an adoption perspective. I think the ease of use, I think, probably comes number one, and then how you're able to reduce your sales managers and users time in terms of they spending a lot of time on administrative activities. If you're able to cover those two, I would assume a lot of adoption issues could get addressed.
Thank you. Geeta's question made me smile. So she says, we have 121 weekly reports that we produce. How do we simplify?
Oh boy. So I think that's we just touched upon, right? So I mean, we did touch upon the fact that again, you want the systems to be easy to use, and again, I think if you are having 121 reports, I mean, obviously there's a lot being asked. I think one of the important things that people forget when they do a massive reporting or dashboarding exercise is how these numbers are being used. What are they being used for? And are we tracking the right measures? Again, as we are all very analytically oriented, people invent their own matrix, and you can spend again ton of time in terms of churning out a lot of those reports and dashboards, but ultimately it has to connect to the business value. And as I mentioned, if you are able to, for example, I'm not sure about what those 121 reports really entail, but let's say we did talk about the digital transformation as a theme over here, and then we broke it down into three areas. What are my CX matrix, what are my operational transformation matrix, and what are my business model innovation matrix? If you're able to simplify across those buckets, and then able to prioritize, saying, is our issue more on the traffic side, or are issues more on the conversion side? Is our issue more on acquisition side, or issue more on the retention side? Then you can even further prioritize and ensure that you are able to bring that volume down. So I think my number one advice to you would, Geeta, to you would be that look at how those reports are being used, what business decisions are being driven of those reports. See if you can prioritize few metrics out of that, and focus on the ones which are most important, and then what is most important may keep changing on a on a quarter to quarter basis, but it's important to prioritize. And last but not the least, once you are able to bring that down to a meaningful list, see if you can get as much of that information coming directly from the system, rather than you trying to massage and create all the nice pivot tables or Power BI visualization. If your system itself can give you a lot of those reports in one single place, then obviously it's even ideal. But yes, I think this 121 number obviously looks a little scary, for sure.
Thanks, Malay. So, guys, we are really running out of time. So, I will take up one more question now very quickly. And Malay, you can discuss this offline as well, going forward. The rest of you, I know you want some tips on specific businesses like spa and salon, education. So, those are the things that I can share content with you which will help you, and you're free to get in touch with me and Malay offline. So I will ask Parashuraman's question now. So he wants to know more about the cost of poor quality, which is a hidden cost. And he's also curious about the monthly recurring revenue because that's new to him. So if you could shed some light on the poor quality PQ, which is the hidden cost, please.
Yeah, so the COPQ again is a broader definition, and I think all organizations need to create their own definition of what does that cost of poor quality really look like, right? So I think obviously one measure, the input measure for cost of poor quality is first of all the quality measures itself, and we did talk about some of the things like like the defects or the bugs or non-conformances, or performance or security incidents which are reported by the customer, etc., as one indicator of quality. The other set of indicator of the quality could potentially also be things like downtime of your platform, and if the platform is not available, or if the performance of your platform is poor. I think what you really need to do is then correlate those parameters in matrix to number two is to NPS, which is is it really impacting my net promoter score? If I had a, like for example, if I had a downtime in a particular day or a particular week, did I get a lot of negative feedback from the customer during that time frame, and what it did to my NPS? And last but not the least, you need to then connect your NPS into what does it really mean in terms of your revenue impact, right? So whether, like for example, 1 millisecond downtime of Amazon, we all know runs into like hundreds of millions of dollars of potential lost sales opportunity for Amazon. So I think you need to figure out your own matrix in terms of what does if you have a downtime, or if you have a bug, or if you have a slower performance, does it really result into the loss of business for you? So I think in some sense you will have to, depending on your industry, depending on your business, you will have to define the COPQ more specifically. And ultimately, I think if I will go back to the second question on MRR, again, we define this as a subscription revenue, right? So if I'm signing up for Byju's as an example, I let's say pay 4,000 rupees a month for a period of 3 years, then basically the monthly recurring revenue for Byju's is 4,000, right? And the lifetime value of that customer is going to be over a period of, let's say, 3 years, if assuming you're not able to upsell further. So it's basically a recurring revenue stream that you would get, and the same thing that you do, let's say, on your Tata Sky, for example, connection, or on your mobile phone connection. These are all recurring revenue stream for the for the enterprises that you are dealing with. So that's something that most of the businesses in digital world are trying to move into the subscription era, and that's possible once you are able to figure out your MRR revenue stream. Okay, so thank you very much. I believe we are at the top of the hour. Once again, appreciate you spending time this afternoon on a busy holiday week. If you have further questions, queries, etc., again, we are also all omni-channel in nature. You can reach us via social. You can send us an email. You can reach out to Shibani as well, and we'll be happy to answer any queries that you might have on this topic or otherwise on LeadSquared as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, Malay, and thank you so much, audience, for sticking around. I still see quite a few questions, but please don't get upset. We'll respond to you via email, offline, thereafter, depending on how that goes. Thanks so much again for joining the session. I know there's a holiday coming up for us Indians, so we're all looking forward to that. Have a lovely week and a weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. And thanks so much, Malay, for taking the session. Bye-bye.